Okay, I'm going to count to 3 and then you're going to go, Santra. All right. 3, 2, 1.
Hi, my name is Sandra Dennis, Interim Executive Director of Miami Workers Center, and I'm excited to be here talking about an initiative called Housing, Health, and Liberty in the City. Miami Workers Center does work at the intersection of race, gender, and socioeconomic status, and we are always advocating with our communities and making sure that they have power and that the folks who've been most depressed have an actual opportunity to lead. And so this project is a year-long, what we would consider a brainstorming project in which community members, local community-based organizations, folks with lived experience, housing experts and activists come together to kind of think about and to plan together a blueprint for a thriving community, specifically in Liberty City. We also know that there are connections between health and housing. And so we're going to be talking about that and going through that with the city, asking folks to really speak to what their experiences have been. We're excited about this initiative. We know that it's a long time coming, specifically about the pandemic that we're seeing. And so we hope that folks will ask us many questions, but also engage in this blueprint that we want to put together for our community. Thanks very much so much for the folks who are watching, and we'll turn it over to our partner and our community leaders. We can hear from them and what they have to say in their connection to health and housing.
Thank you so much, Santra. Really appreciate it. My name is Adrian Madriz, representing SMASH Miami Workers Center. I'm going to also be emceeing this press conference. And next, we're going to be hearing from Alana from Community Justice Project. Alana Greer, ready to go?
Thank you, Adrian, and thank you, Sandra, for having us here today. As community lawyers, we're dedicated to supporting the visions and work of Black and Brown-led organizing, and are really proud to be supporting Miami Workers Center in their efforts to address the crisis of health that is impacting renters here in Miami-Dade, and across the state of Florida. We've seen from inside the system of landlord-tenant laws that there simply is not the right protections in place to ensure that people are able to live with basic dignity and respect and health in their families. We've seen everything from tenants facing slumlords and speculators who have made it a business model to allow buildings to go into such disrepair that mold and mushrooms grow out of the ceiling. We've seen tenants evicted on a cycle so rapid that it discourages even responding to the court. And we know that even with all the best tools in place, including legal representation and organizing support, the laws here in Florida are not built to support our tenants. And that was before the pandemic. Over 1,000 evictions have been filed just in Miami-Dade County since the pandemic began. And we know that thousands more are at risk of displacement, at risk of being exposed to coronavirus, at risk of homelessness, and the many, many health implications that come with housing instability. And we know from research that Black women in particular and families are particularly impacted and disproportionately impacted by these systems. And as part of our commitment to anti-racism and part of our commitment to supporting the leadership of those exactly like the folks you have here at Miami Work Center leading this charge, that we need to address this issue urgently and ensure that everyone in this state and in this county has access to safe, affordable, and dignified housing.
Thank you so much, Alana. Appreciate you. Next, we're going to hear from Miami Climate Alliance and Emily Gorman. Thank you very much, Emily. You can take it away.
Thank you so much, Adrian. I'm so glad to be here today with all of these fabulous partners. My name is Emily Gorman. I'm here representing the Miami Climate Alliance as chair of the steering committee. For those who don't know, Miami Climate Alliance is a network of over 90 organizations and more than 350 individuals working together to build urgency, power, and cohesion in response to climate change. We are so grateful to be joining this network of partners to work for comprehensive systemic changes to the Miami housing industry, especially in Liberty City. As the seas and temperatures continue to rise, the potential health hazards posed by an inequitable housing system also increase. In order to claim our agency and residents and prepare for the worst impacts of climate gentrification and global warming, community must be proactive in reimagining housing and dismantling the existing system now. That's why we're so proud to work with all of these folks for health equity through housing in service and support of Liberty City community members. We're very grateful to support the community's self-determination and leadership in organizing for safe, equitable, and healthy housing. To learn more about the connection between health, housing, and climate, please visit the housing page on our website, miamiclimatealliance.org. Thanks again, Adrian.
No, thank you. Really appreciate it. Next up, we're going to be hearing from some residents that are going to be speaking about their personal experience. The first is going to be a few members from the Miami Worker Center. Porgy Town is one of those members, and she's going to be speaking now. So Porgy, also known as Gigi, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Hello, everybody. My name is Porgy Town, she, her. I am a resident of Miami-Dade County. I used to live under slum conditions, but I don't live under slum conditions no more. I'm in a better place. But when I was living under slum condition, I was working for a slumlord. And we had the rats, the roaches, we had the leaky faucets, we had the mold growing out of the walls, we had the mushrooms growing out of people's houses and people apartments, and it was just a disaster. Sometimes they ran out of hot water, sometimes we had hot water, sometimes we didn't. But I'm here to try my hand at helping other people so they don't have to live the same way. And that's all I have to say about that, I think, right now.
Thank you so much, Gigi. Really appreciate you as always. Next up, we're going to hear from another Miami Worker Center member, Sonia Brown Wilson. Sonia, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and tell us about you, your story, and why this is important to you.
Okay, my name is Sonia Brown Wilson. I'm a member of the Miami Worker Center. I have had quite an experience with the management here where I live. Eventually, I just decided that, well, I keep a tight budget and I'm looking at my money and I'm going, okay, it's time to pay rent. And I went to the office to speak with management and I was told that it was too early, that there were no protections put in place for residents. I became very persistent about it. So the only thing that they would tell me is that they would not charge a late fee. However, they were still expecting to receive their rent. Unfortunately, this happened at a time when all of the schools in the nation were closed down, and I have a set of twins, and they were going to be home from school every day. So I'm faced with the fact that, okay, I have to pay rent, but they're going to be home all day. They need to eat. How do I meet their needs? I think as a nation, we were not prepared, but especially for Black people, there was too much against us. We were behind the 8 ball initially. Then we were really under pressure because then you're faced with, do I feed my children or do I try to pay the rent? Can I afford my medication or do I pay the rent? So there were a lot of things that that surfaced. I even called some of my creditors and, I'm trying to make arrangements to see if maybe I can pay $50 less on this so that I can use it for food. But I was told that unfortunately it was too early in the pandemic and no protections have been put in place for anyone. So they were not able to assist me in any way. unfortunately, that's the world we're living in. And I still think we're very ill prepared for what's happening, because in the midst of all of this, the children are home and they're going through their own mental issues as far as not being able to attend school. They're home all day. Um, the light bills are going up, definitely the grocery bills. Um, so there's just a lot going on. And unfortunately, I think this is the time that a lot of landlords are going to use to put people out on the street. We were already at risk.
Very much, Sonia. Really appreciate you sharing your personal story. So now the next person that's going to speak is actually me. I'm going to be talking about what SMASH is going to be doing in this grant and why this is so important. So once again, let me introduce myself briefly. Adrian Madriz, he, him, his. And SMASH stands for Struggle for Miami's Affordable and Sustainable Housing. And we're a community-driven developer of affordable housing. We're developing something called a community land trust right now in Liberty City on 22nd Avenue and 62nd Street. And it's supposed to address a lot of the health concerns that people have related to housing. Why? Because our organization started with a campaign to go after slumlords, specifically to hold them accountable, end gentrification, and develop Miami for the people by the people. Why are slumlords a problem? They are probably the principal reason why people in Miami, especially, are having health conditions or negative adverse conditions related to their housing. We're experiencing and we're seeing residents who have rats, roaches, mold, mildew, collapsing ceilings, electrical that catches on fire, and plumbing issues and flooding issues. And these are the kinds of things that can really make it difficult to live a healthy lifestyle, let alone try to handle any of the other challenges or concerns that you have with just having a stable life. And it's also, I have to mention, one of the principal ways that racism really manifests in our community, because it is a mostly Black and brown population of poor tenants that are constantly subjected to these kinds of conditions by white or white passing landlords. And so there's not only a health dynamic, there's a racial dynamic that's happening here. But we created and we started to put together this land trust project to specifically address those kinds of concerns. And now, as we partner on the Kresge initiative, we're very thankful to have an opportunity to go even deeper and really address the root causes of a lot of these different challenges and struggles. Because we're now going to open up that conversation to the whole community, and we're going to figure out what it is that we can do to really, on a policy-wide level, have impactful change that benefits all residents of Miami potentially, and make sure that when it comes to their health, their housing is the last contributor to negative health outcomes. So we're really, really thankful to be partnering with everybody on that and to be developing our work and addressing the health issues that are at the root of all the challenges that we face. So now we're going to be hearing from the University of Miami, who's going to be talking a little bit about the evaluative process that we're going to use to measure impact. So from the University of Miami, we have Scott Evans. Scott, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Adrian. I'm Scott Evans from the University of Miami. I'm an associate professor in the School of Education and Human Development and a community engaged researcher and scholar activist. I lead a research team called the Engagement, Power, and Social Action research team at the School of Education, and we work alongside community groups and organizations to understand and address injustice. My team's role in this partnership is to capture outcomes and to help the collaborative team learn from the process in order to better achieve our shared goals. In this first year, we're focused on the breadth and depth of resident leadership engagement. Like the others on this call and in this initiative, we share the belief that those who are most impacted by issues like unsafe and unaffordable housing and poor health should be leading. So we'll be looking at how well we do that as a collaborative. Our approach to this work is not to be detached, objective observers, but to be fully engaged in the project from start to finish. And we hope to continually bring our university resources to the table on this issue. I'll be involving several undergraduate and graduate students as we do this work. Glad to be a part of the effort, and I'll send it back to you, Adrian.
Really appreciate you and all the wonderful work you're doing. Next, we're gonna actually bring it to a close. So I'm just gonna once again reiterate the importance of what we're doing in addressing housing and addressing the health challenges people have because of their housing. And this is especially important now, and I think it's pretty obvious, and it's already been stated, because of the COVID-19 situation and the pandemic that we're all experiencing. The reality is that more than ever, people are going to be placed into terrible health situations because of the potential lack of their housing. There's a moratorium on evictions right now that ends in the state of Florida on July 1st. Once it does, if it's allowed to expire and it doesn't have an extension, there will be a massive wave of evictions that will result in people going out into the street, not having a home, being thrown out in dramatic ways. And during a pandemic, especially one in which we're now seeing a resurgence in the numbers of COVID-19 cases, this is the worst possible outcome. We're going to have more people exposed, unable to shelter in place, unable to quarantine, especially if they don't have a home. We're going to be scrambling to find them places where they would live. And then we're going to wonder, where were the authorities? Where were the public services that would have handled this kind of situation? So as we now look to the ways that this partnership can serve the community, the realities around COVID are making it extremely important and hyper urgent that we address all of the challenges facing the community, especially how it is that we deal with pandemics and these ultra severe public health crises. So that having been said, I'm going to bring it back to Sandra, and then we're going to be able to answer some questions as a group.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Adrian, and to our partners who've done such an amazing job. I think for many of us, what we know happens in these communities is that individual community members are blamed. Folks make it an individual issue in terms of the status or what we would call the maintenance of their homes. And so what we know about the narrative that happens are that these people are not clean or whatever the case is. But what we know to be true is that Miami has an issue with slumlords. We know that we don't have great, specifically in some communities, great housing stock. And as a matter of fact, one of the examples I would give is that the other day we're doing a eviction moratorium action, and we were at a press conference, and the rat ran across the street. And so, to me, no one should have to live under those conditions. People should not have to live with rodents. People should not have to live in mildew. People should have housing that is adequate. And so we want to talk to not only community members about what their lived experiences, but to remind us of how folks are living in this community, and to ask our elected officials, ask our policymakers whether or not this is the county, these are the cities that they represent, and if so, how do they make sure that they meet the needs of these? I would be remiss not to also tie it to health. So we know that children living in these communities also have high rates of asthma. We also know because of the pandemic, people have been forced to be home for 3 months now. And some of these housing conditions are not the best to be stuck at home in already. And so we start to think about what have these homes already done to not only their physical health, but to their mental health. And I'll pause here because I think this is an exciting initiative, but I also want to make sure that we take questions or comments, not from our partners, from our amazing community members, but also for folks who are listening on social media. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to write them in the discussion box and we can answer a few. And I'll turn over to our partners as well to see if you have any questions, community members, if you want to add even more. You all are the experts here, so feel free to add your thoughts and your comments and your lived experience. We'll welcome that as well.
So we are hearing now from Najaric. Thank you, Najaric. This is a time when we need to stick together. And more than ever, I think that this grant gives us an opportunity to demonstrate how it is that this community can really come together on the issues that matter and put together innovative policies and platforms and solutions that we just normally wouldn't see. The reality is that this whole idea of actual community engagement with integrity is relatively new in the Miami landscape. It has yet to be used to be able to create these kind of broader policy solutions in a massively effective and a broadly impactful way. So we're thinking that this is going to be one of the best examples that we can demonstrate as a community, especially as a community that organizes poor people and poor residents, to make sure that we know how to move forward in the future when it comes to the different policies that are going to be implemented for our people, because nobody knows how to put these things better together or how to make sure that they really do serve the community better than the residents themselves. And that's a voice that so often gets forgotten, and we need to make sure to include. So any other comments or questions?
I want to acknowledge Miss Linda Video. She's amazing. She's chatting with us, and I think what she's saying is absolutely right. There are folks who are oppressed. Doesn't necessarily mean that we know that they are the sharpest. They're making $1 out of 15 cents every day. They are making they're meeting their everyday needs with almost nothing. And so we know that the conditions that they are forced to live in is unacceptable. And I think this kind of like initiative is an opportunity to continue to build power together and to, I would say, put more pressure on folks who have gained power to do right and to do right, I guess I would just say, by the community residents, and to make sure that everyone has an opportunity not to only have good housing, but also to make sure that the housing isn't, like you said earlier, Adrian, impacting their health. Go ahead, Miss Sonia. Sorry so much for interjecting right before you went.
Oh, no, that's okay. One of the things I think that is largely being ignored is the mental health of the people affected. First, I would like to discuss the children. I see in my children and some of the other children that they're very restless. This is something they have never encountered. To not be able to go to school, their social skills. I'm watching for anxieties or depression because their whole world has been turned upside down. And literally on the end of that, I can add, as a mother, I have spent more time with my children since they've been home with me all day, every day, which is a wonderful thing, but it can be unnerving at some time, but at the same time, it's like, okay, they're home. We turn the air conditioner on, my light bill has quadrupled. And you have to keep money, not only for food, but you're like, okay, I have to have enough money to have masks or hand sanitizers or bleach. I ran around for 3 weeks looking for a gallon of bleach. I finally got it after 3 weeks. But it's a new way of life, not only for the adults, but for the children as well. So I can tell you, my mental health was, I felt it was at stake because the world as I knew it has changed. And unfortunately, I don't think it will ever return to what it was before.
100%. Thank you so much for that, Sonia. We have a couple more questions coming in. So can the panel talk more about health and housing during this hurricane season and what that would look like in low-income communities? Panel, how do you want to respond to that?
Well, I have a question, and it's, how do you survive hurricane season if you're homeless?
That's a good point.
Where do you go? You can't go to a shelter. They're full. You can't gather supplies. You can't prepare because we don't know what to prepare for. Is it homelessness first and then hurricane, or hurricane and then homelessness? What happens first?
Mm-hmm. You know, sometimes we get lulled into a false sense of security as Floridians because we think, oh, another year, another hurricane season, nothing we haven't seen before. But then when we were hit by not even, I think, a category 2 hurricane a couple of years ago during Irma, that really caught us off guard. And there were a lot of people who were horribly affected, who had property damage, who didn't know where to go, you know, and we thought we had so saturated the community with that kind of information, with that kind of preparedness, that there was no way that anybody could like not know what to do during hurricane season, especially in Florida. But the reality is that preparedness for our community is something that we take for granted, and there is not necessarily this intentionality behind it. And I think that that's one of the things that this partnership also has an opportunity to address, to make sure that there are the networks and the infrastructure in place, and to ensure that people, you know, aren't waiting for like, you know, angels to descend in order to save them during a hurricane, right? Like they know what to do, they're adequately prepared. And not only that, they can act as leaders for the rest of their community and act as a beacon of support and hope in these times of struggle. So that's one of the things that we can definitely make sure to talk about in the course of putting this grant together. And then what's the next question? I think
Adrian, if I may add to that real
go
quick
ahead.
before we move on from the hurricane topic. I just want to say thank you for raising this question, Trinice. The truth is that we are in real danger right now. We are in hurricane season. We have already had a series of named storms. We're expecting a very active season for the rest of the year. And as far as we can tell, our government agencies are not prepared for hurricane season during a global pandemic. We at the Miami Climate Alliance, under the leadership of Joanne Perodin, have been trying to map what all of the response plans are from the federal government, the state government, our local community agencies. And frankly, the sense that we're getting is that we are, as a community, underprepared. And I think it really highlights why initiatives like this are so important. We need real community leadership and real self-determination for neighborhoods in order to survive. It's impossible for individuals to be fully prepared for a global crisis of this magnitude. It's not reasonable to expect that we as a single household could, prepare for a full hurricane season, prepare to be without electricity for 3 weeks at a time, prepare to have food on hand for 3 weeks at a time. The economic situation that we're in right now, that's just not possible. And so it is absolutely necessary that community to community, neighbor to neighbor, that we prepare for hurricane season, that we prepare for the crisis that we're in right now, and that we get ready for the future so that as we build new systems, we are inherently connected, inherently prepared neighbor to neighbor, and as resilient and as sustainable as we can possibly be.
Absolutely.
Someone said something funny to me. Not necessarily funny, but someone was like, there's always talk about preparing for storms throughout the entire year. Buy a little bit water here, buy a little bit more snacks there. And they're like, well, we eat all of our hurricane snacks during the pandemic, right? We drank all of our water during the pandemic. And so folks who were trying to be a little bit, mindful that hurricane season was getting a canned good here and there, the pandemic just really threw them off of anything that they were able to prepare. And so folks are in a real desperate situation. And I also want to just remind, and I would always remind specifically folks who are living this experience, that it's not your fault. We have to do a better job to make sure that not only on the recovery end, but on the preparation end. So for our city and for our county and for our state, who understands that residents have already spent more than they have during the pandemic, what does it look like for them to step in right now and say, we know you might have difficulty planning for a storm. How can we support you right now? And so these are the conversations I think we should definitely continue to have because I think folks need answers right now. I mean, I feel like we've had storms already in Florida. It's been flooded, it's been raining. We're like, what's going on? So that's just my 2 pieces that I wanted to add.
So we got a question here. How can we, Florida residents, help ensure that you receive the grant? I think that's a good question. So just to clarify a little bit about this process, there are two phases of the grant. The first phase is this planning phase, which we've already gotten funded to do, and it's going to be happening over the next few months, where we meet with the community and see, hey, what kind of a plan do you want to put together? What are the major challenges that we should be addressing? We're in a pandemic now, so that's probably going to be very pertinent and very much on people's minds. Hurricane season is going to be another topic. And then just the structural issues that we have around the lack of affordable housing that are always present, and then threat of climate change and climate gentrification. So somehow we got to come together as a community and figure out how we're going to come up with a policy or a project that's going to adequately address all of those different challenges. That's phase one. Once that plan is put together, that plan is then submitted to the Kresge Foundation. They review it and they say, okay, looks like this is a solid plan. We're going to give you funding now for phase two. So that's what would happen in an ideal situation. That will not happen, however, if the Miami community especially is not adequately involved in the planning for phase two, which is happening right now. And so there's going to be a mass community meeting that we're holding on July 16th. And that is going to be the opportunity for folks of this community to really sink their teeth into it and get involved and figure out how it is that we're going to handle a lot of these challenges. The more folks that we have attend that meeting, which, by the way, it's going to be virtual, just like this. So there's not going to be any limitation to how many people can be there. But the more folks we have attending, the more folks we have engaged throughout that entire process and making sure to give us their good and honest feedback, that will help strengthen the overall proposal and make sure that we get funded for phase two. So really great question there, Brianna. Any other thoughts on that? No? Okay. All right. And let's go ahead and, I do want to mention the actual details for the community meeting itself. It's going to be Thursday, July 16th from 6 to 8 p.m. And the title is Never Again, Building a Pandemic Resilient Housing System for Miami, where we're going to be talking about the plan and how it is that folks can be involved. And we're going to be obviously publishing a lot of details and promoting it in the weeks to come. So I'm sorry, there was another question that was posted, and it was, how can we make sure the rent moratorium is intended? I think that he meant to say extended. Okay, and then another question, we have less than 14 days and the eviction moratorium will end here in Florida. Can the panel speak about how community could be involved? All right, go ahead, panel.
I can speak a little to the rent moratorium issue. I'm sorry, Sandra, did you want to? First and foremost, you can call the governor right now, tweet at him. I don't know if Adrian, if we can put up the number and the information to really just let your elected officials know, and particularly the governor who has the power to do this with a stroke of a pen, that we need this moratorium to extend through the entire course of this emergency and time for people to recover. That's the least amount of protection people need. And so we really need to make sure that that's done. And I think it's really important to lift up the work that Miami Worker Center and the Florida Housing Justice Alliance have been doing over the past few years before this pandemic hit, to think about what happens to renters during states of emergency. There was a bill that got a hearing in the House and wasn't even heard in the Senate up in Tallahassee that would have addressed and made an automatic moratorium in situations just like this and in things like hurricanes. And we really need our elected officials to pay attention to the voices of renters and those leading fights like the ones Miami Worker Center is leading, to make sure that we have a plan for this before the emergency hits. We know we're going to get more hurricanes. We know there'll be other crises, and we know we're living in one right now. And so our leaders need to act, and they need to follow the lead and the visions of folks like the leaders you're hearing from here on this call.
Absolutely. And can everybody see what I'm sharing on my screen?
No.
I don't think we see it.
No? Okay, that's weird. Well, I'm trying to display the window, I'm sorry, the number for folks to call, but I guess it's not showing up for some reason. Okay.
It's scrolling at the bottom of the screen, Adrian.
Oh, it's scrolling at the bottom. Oh, perfect. All right. So that's the number to call. And it's very important that folks call and engage in all of the activities that we're doing to extend the moratorium and ensure that there's rent relief and rent forgiveness. Next question. Preparedness for marginalized communities because of the inequitable funding to those communities will prove to be disastrous. Oh, yes, that's an excellent point, Linda. And we definitely want to make sure going forward that the preparedness is there. And that's the whole point of this project. And there has been a history of unequal distribution, especially when it comes to resources and preparedness in this county. And just like everything else, it tends to fall along geographic lines which have been a result of the history of Miami, which was settled along racial lines. So inevitably, the communities that don't get the resources they need are Black and brown ones. And the ones that are usually economic secure and don't really have to worry about anything and think that every hurricane season is just going to be like the last one, those are the wealthier, usually white or white passing communities. So absolutely, we have to emphasize that. Any other thoughts on that, on preparedness?
Hey folks, Emily Gorman from Miami Climate Alliance. I just want to lift up with what Santra said earlier, which is that the burden is continuously placed on individuals to be prepared, and that is ridiculous. It doesn't work like that. We are a community, we are a collective, and we need to prepare as a collective, we need to prepare as a community. You know, in the words of Valencia Gunder, your neighbor is your first responder. That's true.
Yes.
The people who live next to you are the difference between life and death, and we got to get connected to them, and we got to prepare as a whole community, as a whole neighborhood together, or frankly, we will be inadequately prepared.
Absolutely. Okay, another question. Being that we're in a pandemic that houseless folks having to deal with not having a home, this could affect their mental health. Can the panel talk about this some more? So yes, how the pandemic is affecting folks' mental health.
Well, I'd like to add to that. A couple of years ago, we had a hurricane, and I was standing outside and I noticed all of these trucks with trash on the back. And being a community leader, of course, I walked over and began to ask questions. And I was told that it was being a post-hurricane staging site. And I'm like, okay, in layman's terms, what does that mean? Oh, it's going to be a dump. I was shocked. I was totally shocked. And I'm like, he says, yeah, the first truck in the front, they came from Coral Gables. And I'm like, excuse me? Coral Gables? They were lined up for miles. When they finished that day, the trash was about 3 stories high. They never notified anyone in our development. Shortly after that, we had a lot of residents that got sick with respiratory infections, asthma. The smell was horrendous. On top of the fact that it was supposed to be post-hurricane debris, which ended up being bathtubs, garbage cans, anything but. So as far as health issues go, and then of course on the end of that, the rodents came and there were snakes everywhere. But we were not involved in the process. People were actually getting sick from the debris that was 3 stories high. However, they would not speak out of fear of retaliation from management.
Wow, that is terrible, Sonia. But thank you for sharing that story. I think it's really important for folks to know. I also want to highlight some data points on the mental health topic. So there was an article released recently by the Washington Post that talked about it, and it says data shows depression and anxiety already roiling the nation.
Mhm.
Nearly half of Americans report the coronavirus crisis is harming their mental health, according to a Kaiser Family Foundation poll. A federal emergency hotline for people in emotional distress registered a more than 1,000% increase in April compared with the same time last year. Last month, roughly 20,000 people texted that hotline, run by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Online therapy company Talkspace reported a 65% jump in clients since mid-February. Text messages and transcribed therapy sessions collected anonymously by the company show coronavirus-related anxiety dominating patients' concerns. So obviously, this is a really big deal, this mental health thing around coronavirus. But the other thing that folks need to keep in mind is that this particular model that we're using for our grant program here in Miami is based off of a successful model that was done in Virginia. And partners there were like the Housing Authority of Virginia and the University of Virginia. And not only did they want to see what kind of impact that having better housing would have on people's mental health, they wanted to see what kind of impact just being a part of the design process, just being part of the planning process would have on people's mental health. And it did. It had significant impacts because people, for the first time in a long time, felt like they had a future that they could look forward to, that they were involved in the tangible changes that were being made to their community, that it wasn't being dictated to them, that it was actually being done in collaboration with them. And that had a significant improvement on people's mental health right there. So absolutely, we want to make sure that through this planning process that we're designing it in such a way that we can see similar impacts here in our Miami community, because we definitely need improved mental health. That's for sure. Next question.
Really quick before you go to the next question, Adrian,
Yes.
and when we think about what we already know about what housing instability and evictions do to mental health, on top of this crisis that you've already laid out, how deeply it's affecting our communities, it's really scary. We know that major depression and as well as recurring depression for years after an eviction or after a foreclosure has been studied and shown to be an impact. And again, that's an impact that is doubling down on folks, particularly Black women and mothers. And studies have really shown that that impact is disproportionately focused on folks that the system has acted on over and over again. And so it's really our responsibility to work together to dismantle those systems that are creating these harms and create space for folks to be able to provide these things for their families and for each other. And I know there's a number of work going on in the community, including Dream Defenders, who's working on providing mental health resources as we work to create systems that don't create those problems in the first place.
I'd like to add to what Alana was saying. On top of those issues, for myself, is the issue of the police violence right now taking place. Along with all of these other things that are happening, we have the protests going on. And people are, they're paying attention now. But this is something, I'm 55 years old, and I can go back to the age, at least maybe about 40 years of living the same nightmare in silence. But it's coming at a time when everything is crucial. The pandemic, the hurricanes, Black Lives Matter. They've always mattered. But they're getting to see it from a different perspective. And I think that in itself plays a lot into mental health. Because I'm just paranoid. I'm constantly watching my children. I'm constantly watching my grandchildren. And I find myself just paying attention more to what's going on around me out of fear that it could be interpreted as something of a threat. So then I have to be watchful. So all of that combined.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Are there any other thoughts? before I move on to the next question?
Yeah, I would just say that, I know we have to start to wrap in a few. I would say that as folks get ready for the first community meeting, that there will be another opportunity for us to state our concerns and co-create a blueprint together. But not only that, I think that, you know, their Miami Worker Center continues to want to center, or we center, the folks who are the most impacted by any of these pandemics and pandemic around health and also around housing. And that continues to be Black and Brown women and femme. And so we want, folks to show up, and not only for this meeting that's coming up, but also to make sure that they've done their census, that, there are local elections coming up where we have another opportunity to really vote for folks who will have your same core values. And so there are other ways that we want folks to be engaged in this process alongside with us. I know there's been comments in the live, there's been from the Jared, he's advocating for another stimulus package. We think that's overdue. There's needs for more social services. There's not enough social services. There are a lot of folks who haven't had the ability to pay rent in the last 3 months. Also, the same rent that they're asking for, a lot of the housing conditions aren't even great. And so we just know that they're not on, this project is just one project, and we're going to do an amazing job in pulling a blueprint together. But we want to make sure that folks know there are other ways to be engaged as well. You can check out any of the organizations that are here that are doing phenomenal work to really begin to figure out what your role could be in, and making sure that your concerns are come to the table and that they're adequately met. So that's what I wanted to add to this conversation as well.
Absolutely. Okay, so just a couple of comments before we close it out. Najaric, like he said, what is the latest on the housing hotline? We talked about in the previous meeting. So I think Najaric is referring to this initiative that we're undertaking, and not necessarily part of this grant, but can be, where we're doing it in conjunction with allies across the state and across the South, to make sure that when folks have housing issues, especially if they are having trouble paying their rent or having trouble with their landlord that's not negotiating with them, that they can call this hotline and then get answers, get resources, get different solutions that they can use in their situation. And that's one of the many tactics that we're working on to make sure that there's rent relief, but there's no replacement for this bigger policy that we really need to have happen, and that the Governor DeSantis is really going to be responsible for pushing through. Because if this rent or this eviction moratorium is allowed to expire on July 1st, then there will be a wave of evictions. There will be a lot of people who will not be able to pay all of that rent that is now due from April, May, June, and then July. And then, we wish we could have other solutions kind of come into play here. But the reality is that given the amount of time that we're dealing with, and the fact that the Florida Congress is not in session right now, the only person who can actually extend that moratorium and provide relief is the governor of the state of Florida. So that it is really, really incumbent on the governor to make that happen. And then we need to, as a community, continue to hold all of our elected officials accountable to ensure that there's a long-term, lasting rent relief and housing affordability for all of Florida's residents. Linda says, that would surely help, along with food vouchers. There are foods that people would be able to purchase that are not given at the food distribution sites, especially those with certain health conditions. I think that's a really good point, Linda. There are a lot of different ways that people are hurting right now, not just with the housing specifically. And one of the things that I've noticed is that even though the counties have been good about hosting food distribution sites, many of them are drive-through, and you are required to come in a vehicle. That is a huge oversight, because so many of the people in our community do not have vehicles, and they can't arrange to have one pick them up and take them to the site. And that's been a major concern that's been highlighted by several of our members. So that really does have to be addressed. Any other thoughts?
I'll just remind the folks about the upcoming meeting, Adrian, and then I think we're all good.
Okay, so yeah, one more time. That meeting is going to be happening on July 16th from 6 to 8 p.m. It's going to be available to everybody to see all over the world through Zoom and Facebook Live. And then just to reemphasize what we're going to be doing at this meeting, I'm going to read a brief summary about what it is. The rent keeps going up, but the housing keeps getting worse, and it keeps making us sick. Miami is experiencing hyper gentrification combined with a never-ending supply of slumlords who want to charge you $1,000 a month for a studio with mold and roaches during a pandemic. How do we solve this problem? Join us for this virtual community meeting where we will put together real solutions in partnership with University of Miami, Community Justice Project, Miami Climate Alliance, Miami Worker Center, SMASH, and Miami-Dade County's Department of Public Housing and Community Development. So that's again going to be Thursday, July 16th from 6 to 8 p.m. The title of the event, Never Again, Building a Pandemic Resilient Housing System for Miami. We're going to be putting together the solutions, the plan, and the application that we're going to bring into phase 2. Bring your friends, bring your family, bring everybody you know. Make sure they're there. It's going to be a really good time, and we're going to talk about very important issues. And we hope to see you there. And I think that we're going to just close it out then, if that's okay with you, Sandra. Okay. All right. Well, we thank everyone for coming. Huh? I'm sorry?
I said, if it's okay with you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're good. I think people seem to be well informed. And we appreciated the questions and everybody who participated in the live comments. If you continue to have questions, we're more than happy to answer them. Feel free to contact us on our social media pages anytime. And we'll be able to, sit down with you and make sure you understand exactly what this program is about and see how you can get involved. We will be in contact with everybody who was viewing so that you get the details for the next meeting, again on July 16th. We appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us on this wonderful Thursday, and we hope to see you again very soon. Have a good one.